The round kick, used by every single striking art, yet so often misunderstood. Different styles, different mechanics, yet all of them work depending on the situation. And this is where most fighters get confused because they're looking for one single correct way to kick, and there just isn't one. Every mechanical choice solves a different problem: speed, power, balance, or recovery. In this video, I'm going to break down why those differences exist so you can actually understand kicking mechanics. Instead of just throwing them randomly, you can choose what works best for you. Let's dive in. We're going to start right here with this lead foot. Where you place this foot is going to affect everything else about your kick. If you step forwards towards your opponent, you are telegraphing a little bit, but you're going to generate forward momentum and more power. If you place this foot slightly to the left, you'll have a better angle for deeper rotation. At a bare minimum, that foot should always be on the center line and never to the inside. Here's an example. This fighter is a southpaw, so we're looking at a left kick here. Let's see where he places his lead foot and how that affects his kick. Looks like he stepped pretty much right on that center line, maybe slightly to the outside of it. Placing his foot here gives him enough room to rotate his hips and get enough of a swing in that kick to penetrate his target just enough. It's not going to be a super deep kick, but it's going to have sufficient power. Let's take a look at how it plays out. Here you go. As I suspected, the kick just penetrates the target. It's not super deep, it's not a very deeply rotated kick, but it's enough. Now, let's go back to this frame. Had he stepped here and placed his foot more to the outside, the angle of his kick would have been much deeper. The rotation would have been much deeper. It would have penetrated deeper. But in this particular situation, maybe he didn't want that because that type of kick takes longer and more effort to recoil. Here's another example. This is Bokao. Now look, he's just thrown a left kick and his foot has landed very much to the inside. If he were to throw his right kick from here, it would be a terrible kick. There would be zero rotation and no power. Being the fantastic kicker that he is, he immediately adjusts that lead foot, brings it back closer to the center line or slightly to the outside, and check out the rotation in his kick. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is what happens with this base foot right here. And this is where you're going to get a lot of differences of opinion. Even if you're looking at the same fighting system, Muay Thai, kickboxing, Taekwondo, various flavors of karate, there are going to be differences in what happens with this foot in the round kick. Using Muay Thai as sort of the base case, what we would generally expect here is upwards lift up onto the toes, locking this back knee pretty much straight, if not very close to that, and rotation to some degree of the foot outward. And depending on how deep the fighter wants to rotate, this foot is going to rotate either 45 degrees or sometimes all the way around 180 degrees, and the heel may flip completely forward. Now, keep in mind, this is the only part of the body that's actually touching the floor during the kick. So what this foot does is really significantly affecting all the other mechanics of the body. When this foot rotates deeply, you'll see the hips turn to the side towards the angle of this camera right here. Like when you can read the whole front of the fighter's shorts, that's a pretty deep rotation. I think that even if fighters don't always rotate this deep in every single kick, it's really important to be able to control that whole range. If you can rotate fully, you'll get maximum power, but understandably, that's not always what you want to do in every situation. Sometimes you won't want to rotate as deep because you're going to sacrifice some of that power for speed. Being able to rotate this deep, I think, is a fundamental necessity for Muay Thai fighters for sure, and probably most other kicking styles as well. Take a look at this image. This is AI generated. This is a terrible kick. I want you to notice a few things. Look at the hips. They're pretty much square facing the opponent. There's like zero rotation here. A good kick, we'd want to see rotate over, kind of like this. Secondly, there is some rotation in that base foot, but it's not even 45 degrees. That's very shallow rotation, which is probably why the hips won't turn over. And of course, lastly, if you look at the kicking leg, the knees and toes are pointing pretty much straight up. That's not very round at all. That's a very upright kick. You definitely want to be able to turn that over to hit with the right part of the shin or the foot. Okay, I'm actually using my younger son here as an example in this video, and I know one day he's going to grow up and find this video, and when he can really kick hard, he'll probably kick me for using it, but I'm just going to use it anyways. He's about 10 years old in this clip. It's a few years ago, and you'll notice when he kicks, that base foot is not rotating at all. His toes are pretty much pointing straight at the pad holder. You also notice that he's not stepped to the outside at all. There's no upward spring. His base leg is weak. It's not exactly locked straight. So all of the mechanics that we talked about earlier are missing here, and that's why the kick has no power and no rotation. But if you take a look at this clip, this is just a few weeks ago actually, we managed to make a short trip to Phuket, Thailand, and got to tour a few different clubs there. And he's looking a little better in this kick. He's about 12 years old here, and you can see that base foot is now rotating at least 45 degrees. Could be deeper, but this is a good starting point. The hips are rotating over, he's springing up, his base leg is pretty much straight. That's a much more effective kick. At the highest level, Bacao, look at this kick, perfect form, all the mechanics that we just spoke about, springing up on his base foot, rotating his pivot foot, hips are turned over, excellent extension, excellent rotation. Here's another example. This is Narupal. You can see with his high kick, all the same mechanics, up straight on his back leg, flipping over his base leg, rotation deep. Here's Yodsen Klai, same thing, not turning his foot over as deep, but you can see his hips are fully turned over. He's just super flexible. Here's Bacao kicking some pads, all the same mechanics, rotation, springing up, hips turned over. And Yodsen Klai on the bag again, so much power, hips turning over, super deep. So there's a really important distinction I want to make here when it comes to rotating the pivot foot on the floor. Big difference between planting hard on that foot with lots of weight, springing up on it and pivoting it, versus leaving the ground with upward spring and pivoting it while you're in the air as you kick. That sort of kicking is very common in Taekwondo, where they want rotation and the depth that comes with it, but they need more speed than they need power in most instances. Look how this athlete is rotating their base foot. It's a similar rotation, except they're not putting any weight on that foot. In fact, they're springing up and actually coming off the ground as that foot rotates. This is for explosive speed. There's nothing wrong with doing that as long as you understand what it gives you. Like Serkan Yilmaz, the Turkish samurai who was a K1 superstar, knocked plenty of guys out with his Taekwondo style kicks. Honestly, he was super fun to watch. Here's Chingiz Alazov, he's another example. Look how he just comes right up off the ground as he explodes forward with that kick. He's not planting weight on it and rotating, he's flipping it while he's up in the air, rotating his hips that way. Okay, moving forward. So the next detail we're going to look at about round kicks is what to do with the actual kicking leg. You can see from this picture, this is one of my old students, Danny. He's a great kicker, and he prefers to kick with his leg significantly bent on impact. What that style of kicking allows is for the hips to rotate deeper, especially if there's a flexibility issue. Other kickers do it that way as well. If you look at Bacao, often you'll see him when he's coming in for full power kicks, his leg is still bent on impact, and it's almost contacting more the front of the target as opposed to the side. That works especially well when you have forward momentum, like you're sliding forward towards your opponent. So that's not always necessary, especially if you're attacking a sensitive target like the head. If you look at this example of Narupal, he's throwing a high kick here. He's not bringing his knee across the front of his target. He's actually locked his legs straight. There's a lot of quadriceps snapping here, almost like karate, taekwondo, or kung fu in this case, but it's more than enough power to knock his opponent out with a head kick. So question for you, what do you think about this kick? Flat foot, shallow rotation, base leg slightly bent, hips are not rotating over, and the kicking leg is mostly straight. Doesn't that break every rule that we just spoke about? Let me explain. Think of every detail we just spoke about not as hard, fast rules, but as dials that you can turn up or down depending on your context. So, the deeper you rotate any of these dials, the base foot, springing up, turning the hips, keeping the leg bent upon impact, all of those things add power, rotation, and depth. But when you think of your context, you might not always want to do that. In some instances, that level of rotation is too slow. It leaves you vulnerable. Also, dialing it down a little bit makes the kick faster, and more importantly, makes the recovery faster. When the recovery is faster, it enables the athlete to use the kick in a combination, not just at the end of the combination, but mid-combination. This is so common in fighting styles like Dutch kickboxing. If you take a look here at Nicky Holskin and the way he's throwing his kicks in the middle of his combinations, he's able to throw punches and kicks and back to punches seamlessly. That would not be possible if he was rotating all of these dials all the way like we saw in the earlier examples. Here's a quick sparring example with two of my students. So one of them opts for a more traditional Thai deep rotation type kick. But you can see how when he misses that kick, he's really exposed for the counter, and that's because of how deeply he rotated. On the other hand, if you look at the other athlete here, he opts to kick in a way where he's not fully rotating. There's enough rotation here that there's impact, but it's not so deep that when his opponent goes to counter him, he's still able to get his foot back onto the floor and use a maneuver to stay engaged and counter. Sometimes you don't want power, you don't want deep rotation, you want speed and the ability to recoil back to defensive posture quickly. And that might be like in this situation here where the opponent is standing really close and is ready to explode with his counter. In other instances, you might just be striking a really sensitive target, namely the head. If you're throwing a head kick, honestly, especially depending on your weight, like if you're a bigger guy like Jerome LeBanner or Peter Arts, you don't really need to rotate that much. It's more than sufficient just to get a kick up and have it land flush, even if it's not fully rotated at all. Well, let's talk about where your head should be when you throw kicks. I'm not talking about like mentally, I'm talking about like physically, like your actual physical head, where should it be? So a really interesting mechanism that generates power is leaning the head over. When you lean your head over and your upper body over, it sort of acts like a lever. It lifts your leg up faster and harder with more momentum and more force. See Mirko Krokop, who is a phenomenal head kicker, he did that all the time. He leans way over and that gets his leg up with so much more force into these powerful head kicks. Peter Arts did that a lot too, and many other high-level K1 fighters. So there really isn't a perfect way to kick. What matters more than copying a specific style is understanding the mechanics underneath it. When to pivot your base foot and when not to. When to stay grounded and when to spring up. When to turn your hips over all the way and when to keep them tighter. Whether the leg straightens on impact, stays bent, and whether your head stays upright or leans offline. None of these things are fixed rules. They're all dials, and the right setting depends on the context, the range, the timing, balance, speed, power, and specifically what your opponent is giving you in that moment. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Don't chase a perfect kick, chase understanding, because once you understand the mechanics, you can adapt your kick to any situation. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.